What's up, everybody? You guys have been asking me what my setup is, what my deck setup is, all that kind of stuff. So today I thought I'd break down what's going on inside my strategies. Let's hop into it. I'm going to show you guys two different setups that I got going. One kind of a safer all-around approach that a lot of people are running, and then like my weird, like really leaning into the adapt stuff setup. So first of all, the first setup is very well-rounded. I'm also going to put on the bottom of the screen the stat caps for balance, so you guys can kind of get a reference for how close we are to these stat caps. So this setup is very all around. We've got 186 damage, which is only 4 below the damage cap. We got 75 res, so it's only 1 below the resist cap. We've got enough accuracy for everything except aura pop. You can fizzle it, but I think this is a good setup because you cannot fizzle any of your storm spells, and that is very important on a balance, in my opinion. You have a crazy amount of block. 700 is pretty dang high, and you do get one shield pin, so you get a little extra block to a school of your choice. Your crit is a little low with this setup, but 55 pierce is below the max, so it's still pretty solid. The big draw to this setup is the 88 pip conserve, which balance takes advantage of a lot with their spells like mana burn and their things like savage paw, maybe even like the new lore spell. So I would argue that on a balance, most of the time, if you're not doing my weird strategy, is like super important. So this setup is worth checking out. You do also have a little bit of less pip chance, but I can show an answer to that as well. So starting off with that setup, we've got the Stalker Hood. This is the reason why this setup has so much res, but it's also the reason why this setup has so low crit. So another option for the hat that a lot of people run is either the Skyfarer hat or the updated Skyfarer hat, which is from the Wastelander pack. I don't currently have that hat, but it gives like one less res, but it pads out the other stats. So it's really solid to just kind of make up for the stats you're giving up from your other pieces of gear. But I really like the Stalker Hood, because I feel like on a balance, if anyone has any shield pins extra, they're going to set them to balance most of the time, just because everyone has the option to do so. So there's going to be a lot of matchups where you can't really rely on crit anyway. So giving up one piece of crit gear is better than, say, the Skyfarer hat that gives up crit block. Your tank ability as a balance is really important. So that's why I personally prefer the Stalker Hood. Moving on to the robe, there's really only one robe that stands out as like the best robe in my opinion. It's the Hun Hao robe, which is unfortunate because it is locked behind the raid. Even the new pack that gives raid-like gear gives the Shabalba set. It's the fair. I don't actually. I stitched the fairy one, so I don't have access to that one. But its stats are not nearly as good as the Hun Hao. You're giving up res, you're giving up all sorts of things. The only other options are like maybe the Meyer coat or the Reaver coat, but these don't give shadow rating, and that becomes a big issue in PvP. But if you don't have access to the raids, you might have to go with one of these. The next piece of gear is another piece of raid gear, but it's the Shabalba set. So you can just open the new fairy pack. What's it called? The new Fantasiful? Fantac Fankitif that one. The fairy pack, like I said, drops a version of the Shabalba set, and all it does is change the item card. So that is still very much an option, and they look cute. I like these a lot. But the reason why these are so good is because they give a lot of damage, and they also are very high res for boots. There's not a lot of other boots, like as you can see with these like burrower ones, like these kind of compare, but they give less damage, less pierce. They give a little bit of pip chance, but they don't give any accuracy. These boots are a must, so if you can't get them from the raid, I would get them from the fairy pack. Now, the wand is a complicated one for this all-around setup. So this all-around setup is revolving around pip conserve, so there's two wands that come to mind here. This one is probably the best option, the Hun Hao Vacuum Sword. It is incredibly well-rounded. Its only major drawback, or this setup's drawback rather, is that it's low HP. And I feel like the only way to make up for its low HP would actually be to run the Aeon Sword, but you are giving up shads for that. There's not a single wand that doesn't give up shads for this square jewel that is actually worth running. So this wand I was running at the start of my adapt strategy, and I was just running 3-piece shad, and it was okay. but you did really notice it in some matchups, especially when people are running a fixed shadow rating on their triangle jewels. It can be really rough to be outshadowed super hard. For the Athame, there's really only one Athame that I feel like is at all relevant, and it's the Death Dream Reaver Knife. It's super easy to get. All you need is Dream Water and a couple runs in Wallaroo. I feel like everybody has this, so I don't really have to go into detail. As far as amulets go, the best amulets are definitely the raid ones again. The Hoon Hao ones are slightly better than the Shabalba, in my opinion. However, the fairy version is exactly the same as the Shabalba with different item cards. So if you don't have access to the Hun Hao, this set is still very good. It just gives a little bit less pip conserve, but it still gives that circle jewel and that triangle jewel that really makes this setup work. There's really just no other option. Similarly to the Athame, the rings are pretty much straightforward. It's just the mainline gear from Wallaroo. These are going to be the best rings out there. There's really not anything that compares that I can even think of. Maybe if you're on a healing school, you could run, I believe it's the Hoon Hao set, gives extra outgoing, but I don't think it would be at all worth it to do on a balance. Then the pet that I have for this setup is super easy. Rain Beetle, super straightforward. Double resist, mighty, dealer, armor breaker, and then a fixed sharp shot just because I feel like it's easier to make in a fixed sharp shot pet. But if you don't have this sharp shot jewel and you don't farm the jewel plants, I would not recommend making it like this. I'd recommend getting sharp shot in the pool and affixing something that's way easier to find. Like probably Balance Dealer is probably the easiest thing to find on this. I don't know if you'll be able to make a pet like that, or maybe even Mighty, but these Sharp Shot Jewels are not easy to farm if you don't already have them. And then for the mount, I'm running the Clockwork Courser. I know it sucks. It's a bundle only, or occasionally it'll show up in the Crown Shop, but it is realistically the best mount. It gives the most stuff. The only one that even kind of compares would be like the set mount with a set pet, but this one is pretty good. If you don't have this one, this setup can benefit a lot from the Crystal Unicorn, which again from a bundle, because what a Crystal Unicorn will do is make it so you cannot fizzle Aura Pops, and you also wouldn't be able to fizzle things like Banshee if you wanted to run them. It's still an okay setup if you have the Crystal Unicorn, or you could run the Rock mount to even out your pip chance a little bit so you're not pip failing as often. But ultimately, I do think the best mount for this setup is going to be the Clockwork Courser. And if you don't have any of those, it is still worth it to run the damage because we're not at max damage. So if you have a 2% universal damage mount like this one or the Vulture, that I would still recommend running those. And for the decks, we've got these brand new ones that just came out that give pip conserve and a circle slot, which was not on any type of deck we had before. Where you get these is this guy here. I'm in Avalon in the Crystal Caves. It's kind of a weird spot to get to, but it's connected to the catacombs, so fast travel to the catacombs. You'll have to make your way through a little bit to get here. But this dude crafts them, and how you get these reagents to craft them is just by running this golden key boss, and I bet in like 2 or 3 runs you could probably get enough to craft the deck, and nothing else here is really worth crafting. Maybe if you're going for a higher damage setup elsewhere, you could run this for more Pierce, the wand. But other than that, I don't think any of this gear is really that relevant. Yeah, we're getting triangle jewels, we're getting less res here. Yeah, none of these are really worth it. If you're going PvE, these are some good PvE robes and stuff, like just for straight up damage and Pierce. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about PvP. Moving on to my second setup. It's a little different because I am running 5P Shad. I'm running in a fixed shadow rating jewel on my deck. So it kind of does things a little bit differently. The other major thing is I get an item card adapt. So this strategy is really for leaning into the adapt and just going crazy with it. So we've got 186 damage, 75 res like before. Our accuracy is a little lower, but it's still good enough to not fizzle anything except Aura Pop. And then also the Storm Beetles can be fizzled. But this setup is about having fun and going fast. So we're kind of ignoring those stats for now. We've got a little bit more Pierce. We got some crit. We do not have pip conserve with this setup. That is the thing that it gives up. This one is, I think, more fun because it gives extra shad rating and it just hits harder. It's a very similar setup to the old one I'm running. The Stalker hat, the Hoon Hao robe, the Shabalba boots, but I'm running the new cute fairy wand. This gives the extra adapt, and it really just goes crazy to be able to have the deck consistency for that. And then these are all the same. We got the Dream Reaver knife, we've got the Hunhao amulet, ring, and then the pet for this is to get extra damage back on the pet. If you want to have the best pet for this setup, it'd be universal damage, not balance damage. But I like the Maycast brace, so that's why I'm using this one. It kind of bails you out of situations. It could also screw you over. So if you want this jewel, it was in the last Scroll of Fortune, so it's not easy to get anymore. The only way to get it would be the Kroger jewel, and you have to redeem it during a certain month, and it's super weird. And again, the Clockwork Courser. This one is another setup where obviously the pip chance is low and the accuracy is low. So if you wanted to equip a different one, it would be okay. 54 Pierce wouldn't be the worst if you don't have the Rock Mount. And honestly, 45 Pip Conserve, there's still a chance, but I wouldn't rely on it with this setup. And then, yeah, we've got the Skyfarer deck. That's where we get the extra shads from. It's a weird setup, I'll admit it. It also gives like a 60 accuracy aura pop. I would not recommend even having that card selected because it will fizzle like every single time, trust me. All right, so moving on to the actual deck setup itself. So you'll notice I don't have everything filled out because I believe there's something to the strategy where you have to throw in another part of the puzzle, but you can kind of interchange what you want to put there. So let's start with the basics. So as far as the adapt strategy, obviously we've got max adapts and then the item card adapt. You could throw in the empowerment if you felt that it was necessary, but ultimately this isn't going to give back any extra pips to us unless somebody's hitting us with a 4 pip, because there's nothing in the deck that is 4 pip that targets ourselves. I'm running 6 Hydras because you get an item card Hydra with this setup, and I'm running 4 Power Novas for if they elemental shield. So you might be wondering what these single shields are for. These are not just for, myth. This isn't just the hating on myth setup. Basically what these are for is for matchups like balance, for matchups like fire even. Any matchup where they can counter shields really easily, you don't want to have extra shields lying around even after you Scorpion. So the idea behind these is just put one on yourself real quick, swap the shield over, give it to them, pop the adapt, and start going crazy with the Hydras. Since this is my high shad setup, I do have quite a few shads and then a bunch of dark surges, because honestly, hydraing over and over again is typically outvaluing a shad, just because these cost 2 shadow pips. A dark surge gives you enough pips to hydra immediately. So it's pretty solid to just dark surge a bunch. Obviously, I'm running bubbles. Judgments are also nice since you are gaining pips with things like Power Nova and stuff if they do elemental shield. It's just nice as a finisher, or even just like a nice thing to end off a combo. It's just a really solid move. The Spirit Shields are kind of self-explanatory. We're trying to put those on maybe to defend ourselves, but more importantly, so that we have a shield on to swap over with Scorpion and then start going crazy with the adapts. I do also think it is important to always have weakness counters, overtime counters, and heal counters. Bunyip's Rage is a really underrated heal counter for specifically balance, because instead of Triton, which costs 1 more pip than Bunyip's, it does solid damage just like Triton, but it also gives an anti-heal aura, which may prevent them from healing right away, but also allows you to aura pop. And even if they replace it, you can still always aura pop. And that's just some extra damage that you're just getting for countering their moves. And I think that's a really fun thing, because we're already giving our opponents shields and then punishing them for it, and now we're giving our opponents auras and punishing them for it. So this is a seriously underrated balance move that I don't see many other balances packing. Some of you more observant folks might notice that there's no blade or trap counters in this deck, and that's because I have not landed on exactly what I think the best counters are. So I'm just going to kind of go through the options and tell you guys the pros and cons of each option. So the number one basic answer to I need to counter traps and I need to counter blades are Riding the Scales and Eye of Vigilance. These spells remove blades and or traps and give pips. The big problem with Riding the Scales in this specific setup is that you're putting shields on your opponent, and those shields are also at risk with riding the scales. So I don't think it's the best option for this setup. And Eye of Vigilance is actually okay. I think it does work with this setup, but I feel like there are better options out there. And if you're just getting pips, you're not really doing anything, unlike some of the other moves I'm going to list here in a second. An honorable mention also goes to Enfeeble. Just removing 3 blades for 2 pips is a solid move because you don't complicate it with possibly removing your own blades and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit safer than Eye of Vigilance, but both are good options if you're just focused on removing the blades and not doing anything with them. Another honorable mention goes out to Sun Serpent. I've never made a setup that has the accuracy that can support Sun Serpent, but I genuinely think it's one of the best trap counters in the game, even if you're not on a fire, because it's 4 pips for 6 traps. When it's maxed out, you get 6 pips back. So it's effectively only a 4-pip move. It's an incredible, it also breaks shields for you since it's universal debuffs only against balance. So I do think this is an option if you can get the accuracy or if you're just a lucky guy and don't fizzle things, but that's not me. So the major difference of what I do versus what a lot of other balances do in the queue is actually try to set up a Gambit when I am countering people that are trap spamming or blade spamming. So I haven't really decided what is the best Gambit to go for. Tribunal Oni is more damage, but it does require kind of more universal accuracy and stuff to use the utilities that go with it. But Duststorm Jhin just doesn't hit super hard, but it is still a decent finisher, and it's important when you're countering buffs to be setting up something of your own so you don't fall behind in tempo as I just spam the same move over and over again. So as far as Duststorm Jhin goes, the spells I'd recommend to help set that up would be Jin's Reversal as the trap counter and Wall of Blades as the blade counter. Because Wall of Blades will provide you shields that don't only protect you, but can also be used to Gambit the Jhin with. And same can be said with the Jin's Reversal. You're not actually using those overtime traps as overtime traps, but if you pack a couple of these, you can counter some important traps and set up your Jhin for the kill shot at the end of the game. That being said, I wouldn't send a Jhin or an Oni unless you're killing with it or you have an adapt out, because both of those spells do trigger adapt because they Gambit things from yourself first. So it can be a really fun strategy. I pulled it off before back when Jhin was a bit stronger, but nonetheless, it is super fun. Moving on to Tribunal Oni, this one I feel like is a little bit easier to set up, but it does require more of a stat sync. So what I'd recommend for that would be Jin's Larceny, gives you blades for blades. Banshee, which gives you blades for weaknesses, which this one is an important one. This one's not optional if you're going for the Oni. It's kind of the only good way to get on infections without just casting straight up threefold fever. And then funny enough, I'm running Centaur a lot of the times when I'm running Tribunal Oni because it does remove 4 traps for blades, and also a 40 life blade makes the last hit of Tribunal hit way harder than the first 2. This is an underrated move. In most setups, it's actually really easy to run this because it's only 90 accurate. And if you're running any universal accuracy, you're probably not going to fizzle that. That all being said, there is also a possibility where you just say, man, if they buff up, I'll just shield a bunch. Since you do have all these set shields in your main deck, you could also just run some elemental shields and put some more inside. As we take a look at TCs here, it's all pretty standard stuff. Putting in weaknesses, empowers, and towers are going to take up the majority of your stuff. Dispels I personally like because I think Shrike is going to become more meta. I'd recommend running 2 reshuffles if you can fit them in. I just can't always fit 2 reshuffles in. And Spectral Blast is one of the highest damaging treasure cards that Balance has in its toolkit, so I would recommend throwing a couple of these in here. Another honorable mention in main deck, a lot of people run Ice Bubbles since they're running Scales, so if the Ice hit will always be in with your multi-damage hits, so it's pretty solid. I also personally do like running Storm Bubbles for this setup specifically, since I am focusing on the Hydra aspect, and that also opens the door to Hidden Bubbles. I don't have it trained right now, but storms can hit in bubble and then set up your Hydra, so it can be a cool, like, remove a debuff and then start going crazy with Hydra. That is an option for you. All right, I think that wraps things up. I think I explained everything that I can explain for the strategy. It's pretty simple. You put a shield on yourself, you swap it on over with Scorpion, you throw out the adapt, and then you start spamming Hydras for that big damage and protecting yourself. And if they do Elemental Shield, then you've just got Power Nova and you're basically sending free damage and getting all the pips back for it. It's a really fun setup, and I hope you guys have success with it that like I did. I will note that when you start doing random shields on yourself and then scorpioning them over, it's kind of lost its wow factor for me. So people are getting wise and people are running, like, riding the scales and things like that, and they'll hang on to them if they see that you're doing silliness like that. So it's by no means foolproof. And the more I do this strategy, the more I kind of incorporate more mana burns into things, more regular stuff. So you can do the Hydra stuff, but if it doesn't work and they're spending pips and turns countering it, you could pivot into a more normal balance strategy. But ultimately, that perfect balance is not like a science. I can't tell you what the exact correct number of cards are to run to make a hybrid setup. It's just not possible because you never know what your opponent's going to run. Honestly, this strategy for me has always been more about having fun and doing cool things and literally just like laughing. Like that game where I was throwing in Ra and I was swapping blades over to my opponent. Like, that was so fun and it was so silly. I wouldn't do this strategy if you are taking this game a little bit more seriously, but the first gear setup that I showed you will absolutely allow you to take this game a lot more seriously. And you can run a deck setup that's a lot more focused on mana burns, lore masters if you have them leveled up. It just makes a lot more sense to do stuff like that and maybe omit these sillier moves and just do normal balance things, because balance is still in a really good spot right now. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this answered most of the questions that you guys had about my setup and about balanced PvP in general. I try to include as much information as I can. I don't know how long this video is going to be because I feel like I've been recording this for a minute. But if you guys enjoyed it, please give me a like and a subscribe, because this video took a bit more effort than my other ones, I feel like, because the editing is going to be really difficult. None of this was scripted, and I am terrible at speaking. I don't know how many bloopers would be at the end of this video if I was including them, because, oh my gosh, I cannot talk. I would appreciate it if you showed the video some love. Anyway, later, taters.